bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening. How you doing? Fade to Black. It's Fade to Black. Today's Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. How you doing? I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Very excited. An amazing week this week. And Kathleen Martin, of course. And last night, Glenn Kreisberg absolutely lit it up, closing out the week this week. Tonight, Keith Thompson is with us. We are going to be talking about his book, The UFO Paradox. You can head straight over to Amazon and get yourself your very own copy. I have read it. It's a great book. Highly recommend it. Now, quick programming update. There is no show tomorrow. I am off for the next 4 days, maybe 5, shooting some stuff. So I've got to go and get that done. And Monday has been reserved. So we'll see where we are on Sunday, if there will be a show on Monday. And definitely a show on Tuesday, though. That's 100%. So there you go. Quick programming update. And I know it's kind of strange that didn't do a show last Thursday, and there were Friday. Was it Thursday? Was it Friday, or was it Wednesday? One day last week. I was off. It was Wednesday. I was off shooting another TV show. And this kind of stuff, well, it happens, but we always try to schedule shooting on the weekends. But, I'm dealing with production crews and people and their time schedules and stuff like that, too, as well. So it sometimes it does get complicated. And definitely, just like every year, from here on out, it's going to be, because next weekend, I have the Conscious Awards that I'm co-hosting out in Miami, Florida. And that's August 3rd and 4th. And I think I'm pulling off a show Monday night. I fly out Friday. Saturday and Sunday is the event. And then I return on Monday morning straight back. So I think that we have a show on August 5th. I'm pretty sure about that. But then after that, for the rest of the year, I'm heading out on different tours around the world. So it's going to be a hit or miss schedule for the second half of 2024. I do have the Contact at Sea Cruise to Alaska that's coming up pretty soon here, September 6th through the 13th. Then I'm over to Egypt, October 3rd through the 14th. I get back from that, and then I turn around and head straight to South America, to Peru and Bolivia with Brian Forrester. And that's November 15th through the 27th. And with all of that, I'm shooting my TV show in between all of that, and still doing Fade to Black, and, like they say, it's the life you chose, right? It's the life you chose. Love it. I have truly found my bliss. Now, there are 3 spots that just opened up for the Peru and Bolivia tour. I think they're still available, and you can click on the links below. That tour has been sold out for 4 or 5 months, but we've got 3 spaces that have opened up, and so go and check in on that now. That is, I'm telling you, that is a life-changing trip. That's the paradigm shift that you've been looking for, is Peru and Bolivia. Okay, so click on the links below. And before I bring in Keith, I wanted to say this. Social media, I'll just make this quick. Social media with our community is always interesting. It's always fun. and I don't comment, but I do read it, and I read it for some of it for the comedy, but I do it for kind of like the ebb and flow of what's going on out there. And our community has a way of just gaslighting itself. It's just funny to me how we do that. But the reason why I bring that up, you would think that in our bubble that we're the only ones doing this. No, head out on the social media, because right now there is a huge fire that has started with the size of Chipotle burrito bowls. Now, you want to check out the crazy? Go and watch some of those videos. Head over to TikTok, man. Head over to Instagram. And just Google that. So much so that the CEO of Chipotle just had to do a press release. Yeah. It's and I feel, you know who I feel for in this social media world? This is where we are today. Is I really have empathy for the employees of Chipotle, because everybody is live streaming from Chipotle. Everybody is ordering burrito bowls. Everybody is watching live stream, posting, and they're traumatized. They are about to be watched millions of times. So think about that. It's crazy. It's crazy. All right. Keith Thompson is with us tonight. He's been at the UFO research game for decades. Now, what's really great about Keith is tonight I get to take the night off. He's a radio host, television host. He's an author. He's a researcher. Not only the ability for me to talk and have a conversation with somebody that is a former TV talk show host, they know how it's done. So for me, I get to ask the most important question: why? And then I just get to kick back because they know what time it is. We're going to be doing all of that tonight. He's an author. He's an independent journalist, talk radio host, former TV talk show host, former U.S. Senate staff member. Don't hold that against him. His articles have appeared in the New York Times, Esquire, San Francisco Chronicle, the Idaho Statesman, and the Pacific Sun. And he's the author of Angels and Aliens and Leaving the Left. He lives in Florida. His new book, of course, is the UFO Paradox. I would like to welcome for the first time to Faded Black, Keith Thompson. He's right there. Keith, good evening, young man.
Jimmy, it is great to be with you on this side of the computer.
Yeah, right. Like I said, man, I'm taking the night off. Okay, so just be ready. I'm taking the night off. And Keith, so I've been following you for a long time, and I don't know why we've taken 10, 15 years to get you on the show, but you're here. And we won't wait 10 years for the next time around. But you get the first time guest disclaimer. And you know this is coming, so let's just get it out of the way. Keith, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends. But we're going to end as friends. We're already friends. But there you go. There's the disclaimer. You have to accept so we can move forward.
Got it.
Accept?
I do accept. the terms of this important agreement.
And you're just like everybody else. You just click on that. You just click on that box. You don't read the fine print. And we're all guilty of that. I kind of want to start here because I've been talking about this all week, about the use of the word paradox on the cover of your book. Okay. And there's a reason for that. And for the audience that has been following this show for a long time, they know the probably thousands of times that I have called myself a walking paradox when it comes to the subject of UFOs. And I'm not immune to that. I'll say one thing and do another, or the opposite. Is it hypocritical? Is it paradox? I am that. That's because the subject is that. And the community probably, they hear from me, but they don't hear it enough from other researchers. So I'm going to actually start there. That's a long setup for an easy question. Why use paradox for the title of the book?
There are a lot of ways to answer it, and I'm happy for the question. It's at the heart of my book. Obviously, it's the title. I will quote a brief remark from a physicist who I have right here on my desk, Yitzhak Bentov. I won't read a lot. He has something that he says is right at the heart of all this. One's level of ignorance increases exponentially with accumulated knowledge. Now, just sit with that a bit. You get more ignorant. You get more ignorant the more knowledge you accumulate. Why? With every fact should come 5 or 10 new questions. And you realize, well, I'm open to some new fact, but I know less than I did before. I've got to ask those questions. I've got to pursue those questions. And so it is the more one knows, the greater one's ignorance. Now, that's a heck of an endorsement for a book. Why, if you'd read my book, the guy's saying he's an ignoramus. Well, I use that because everything I've gone through stages with this. I can tell you about when I first discovered the UFO phenomenon at 12 years old. Not a sighting. I covered a sighting for a school report. In any case, with each new level of information I acquire, I realize that new level requires asking new questions. And I also realize that the way this field rolls, the field of ufology, UFO research, there's a really high premium on having the answers. You must get pitched every day by people who've got the answers, who've reached the conclusions, who know what it's all about. I'm at the other end. The more I study, the less I know. Jacques Vallée says he may be the only one left who doesn't really know what a UFO is. I'm going to try to edge out Jacques for that. He's a friend. I admire him, but I'm right up there with him. We're close to tied. So that's one paradox, but there are others. I'll just touch on it and then we can kind of unpack this. The other is that this is both a physical and a psychic phenomenon. And that connection, by the way, that's not supposed to be possible in the Western worldview. The objective world and the subjective world, never the twain shall meet. There's a firm divide, so there is no mind-to-mind communication. Paranormal phenomena, clairvoyance, telepathy, and so forth can't be possible. They aren't possible. They aren't real because they're not possible, which of course is not true. But in any case, the synchronicity is what connects these meaningful relationships between psychic states and physical reality. The UFO phenomenon, the near-death phenomenon, paranormal phenomena in general did not get the memo the day it was declared that mind and matter, body and mind, have to be separate. So this phenomenon transgresses that division and results in stuff that is impossible, officially impossible.
I was lovely, put together so well. I was Jacques is he's a friend of mine. He's a friend of ours, and I know him pretty well. And we've done lots and lots of things together, not only on the show, but my TV show and events and conferences and all of that. But one day, this one moment, I've had this opportunity a few times, but the two of us are alone. And I don't want to go with the background on it, but we're alone. And I'm 6 foot and he's like 6'6", right? He's a big, tall drink of water. And I'm looking up at him. I go, okay, Jacques. I swear, Keith, this is exactly what I say to him. I'm like, Jacques, hey man, we're all alone. Give me the secrets. Right? Just like that. And he looks down at me and he goes, I'm not going to imitate Jacques, but he looks down at me and he goes, I don't know, but I'm trying to find out. And that's it. That's the paradox, right? That's it right there. And with somebody like Jacques and others, they are going down this road and they're investigating and it does nothing but spider web itself out into more complex issues and more complex questions. And And you've got to choose what avenue to go down and spend your time on, because you can do it in any direction and spend the same amount of time. And when you do that, whatever that path is, then that spreads out, right? Then that takes off. And that's what it is. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I think of it as a big university, and out in the middle is the quad. Big universities do generally have a big field, a quad. And over here is the physics department. Over here next door is mechanical engineering. There's psychology. There's mythology and folklore. There's anthropology. All these fields are implied. And if you start with any of those, and religious studies, let's not leave out religious studies. Religion is probably not going to answer this fully, but these are, in some fundamental way, extreme religious experiences, the contact. And I don't think we should shirk from that. I think we got to reclaim the language. What is a religious experience? It's usually a confrontation with some primordial reality that is almost beyond the ability to speak about. In any case, we're at this university with a broad universal approach, all the departments with their specialties. So you can make sense of this up to a point in mechanical engineering. You can make sense in the physics department. You can make sense in anthropology. And you will ask questions that in some sense predetermine the answer. If you're an anthropologist, you'll ask anthropological questions. You'll get anthropological data. Beware of believing that you've got the whole picture because of that. I'm all for specialization. I hope there are more specialists who come to this field. Ufology is not a real thing per se. I don't identify as ufologist. I have great respect for people who may identify with that term. I'm not here to put the people down. I just think it's an unnecessary term. I'll tell you one reason why. I was recently asked, now that I'm out talking about the book, a reporter, a podcaster said, Keith, I'm mainly interested in this shift in your work. I said, what shift? Well, you started out as an investigative journalist. I've looked up your stuff. You've written about education, criminal justice. You've done health and fitness. Why did you leave that behind to become a UFO researcher? Now, I knew there was an either or in there that I didn't accept, but it took me a few minutes or a few seconds anyway to, what's he saying? I said, I never gave up investigative journalism when I came to the UFO phenomenon. I did it as an investigative journalist. And that was based on an experience I had in the 6th grade. You know what that is because you looked at the book. Let me just summarize it. I had a marvelous formative experience when I was 12 years old. It was my turn in our class to give a current events report. I lived in Northwest Ohio where I grew up, right south of Michigan. And there was a famous sighting in 1966 with which the phrase swamp gas is permanently remembered. We can get to that in a minute. In any case, I gave a report about this sighting, about J. Allen Hynek flying in to do what he was tasked to do, which is give some semblance of order to this conversation. He was a sincere astronomer who did not know that the Air Force had brought him in to explain all this away. He actually thought his job was to explain it, if possible. So I gave a report about his coming in and about the sighting in Michigan, which was quite remarkable. And then it came time for questions in my class. So 12-year-old Keith called on one of his fellow students who said, okay, do you think it's aliens from outer space if it wasn't swamp gas? And I said, well, some people think that. That's an interpretation some people have. And Jimmy, I didn't realize, 12 years old, I don't even know where I came up with the word interpretation, but I understood the difference between primary observations, things that people report, and then how they make sense of them. Are these from outer space? I knew that was a major theory. Then somebody said, okay, Keith, if it wasn't swamp gas and you don't know that it was extraterrestrial, what do you think they saw? It was a great question. And I said, again, I don't know. And I didn't say that to punt the ball. I didn't say it to avoid the question. It wasn't a dodge. I didn't know. But I said to my fellow student, I said, what they reported didn't sound like swamp gas. That doesn't sound like a very good explanation. So my teacher, Mrs. Lowry, fine lady, came up and stood next to me, as she often did when the student was done with his or her report. She said, I think what Keith is saying to us is that with something like this, it's important to keep an open mind and ask relevant questions. And then she turned to me, and often the way teachers will do, used my full name. She said, "Mr. Thompson, that was a fine report. You have the makings of a reporter, or maybe a scientist, maybe even a detective." And then she said, "Follow the evidence wherever it leads." Jimmy, that was like a blessing. It was like a benediction. I had gotten support for my ideas in my family, so that wasn't entirely new to me. My parents encouraged me to follow my bliss, as you said. But I stood there and I thought, I have just been affirmed by an adult. I'm an aspiring adult. I feel included. She heard me, she listened to me, she saw me, she recognized me. So it was with that kind of informal benediction that I continued to pay attention to this. I didn't, I was 12 years old. So I, went on to high school, went on to college, and went on to live a life, became a journalist, wrote about a whole lot of other things. But I never stopped following this. And I continued to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And as I said, quoting the physicist Itzhak Bentoff, every time I got a new fact, I ended up with more questions. And I came to realize that was a thrill. That's as Richard Feynman, the physicist, once was asked, he said, "What is it, Richard, that keeps you going? What is it that keeps you excited about science?" He says, "I'll tell you what, it's the kick of discovery. It's the kick of finding out something new, including what I don't know. It's the challenge is not to be fooled. And we are the easiest people to fool, ourselves." So with that as my overture, that's what brought me to write this book at this time in the wake of my previous book, Angels and Aliens, long out of print, as my second come around to this. And it's what brings me here with you tonight.
We need more Feynmans. We need more Wheelers. Even Niels Bohr, right? If you go back, because the physicists today are closing themselves in. I complain about this a lot. I truly do. And that where I think that the modern approach to science and life in general, but let's just stay with physics and science, is that if you go back to Copernicus, or you go back to Galileo, or you go back to Isaac Newton, and even Einstein, and you go back, the reason why we are here today is because those guys didn't conform. They didn't conform. They stayed outside of the box. If Galileo stayed inside of the box, if Newton stayed inside of the box, where would we, if Einstein stayed inside of the box, where would we be today? And to continue this thought from your answer is this: physicists want to stay in bounds, but yet we have something called quantum computers that operate with qubits. 3 answers. One of those is being given to the qubit from a parallel world. Right? Now, wait. Just pump the brakes here. You cannot have it both ways. And that is a paradox. Right? It's like weird. You're okay with thinking outside of the box there. You don't even know how a qubit operates. You don't even understand how a quantum computer works, but you'll stay with the mystery on that. But UFOs and ghosts and consciousness, that's out of bounds. It's crazy.
That's where our friend John Mack of Harvard, the late John Mack, psychiatrist who fatefully got into this phenomenon. Interestingly, he found out about the alien abductions because he'd read something that I had written, a talk I had given, comparing the structure of the alien abductions to rites of passage. I didn't say that the aliens are actually conducting a rite of passage, but they resemble a rite of passage. So I made a case using Joseph Campbell's work, the mythologist, whom I got to know when he retired. And when you've been around, when you have as many years as I have, and you'll have those if you stay at it, keep living a good life, you get to know interesting people. So I crossed paths with Joseph Campbell, got to study with him about the hero's journey. He was fascinated, by the way, with the UFO stuff. I introduced him to the UFO stuff too. He said it fits the hero's journey perfectly. But in any case, John Mack was hauled before the tribunal at Harvard because he wouldn't fit inside the box. And they found themselves pushing him. You know, John, we're not sure we want you to be doing this. And he said, why? Well, the content is really beyond the pale. What pale would that be in a university committed to academic freedom? He asked them. Alan Dershowitz, who did not agree per se with Professor Alan Dershowitz at Harvard, who did not share John's views probably on alien abductions, he said, isn't it interesting? Us here at Harvard, we have a divinity school. It's okay to talk about angels. John Mack's talking about aliens. It's up to his, is that not allowed? It's up to his fellow academics. If there's something wrong with his findings, if his beliefs are aberrant, bring it on from the academic to fellow academics. Let's have this out in the public square. That's what a university is for. You mentioned Galileo. Famously, he used his computations and he used a device called a telescope. He concluded, whoa, based on Copernicus, turns out the sun does not orbit the earth, but vice versa. He began to talk about that. He got a knock on his door. It was the Vatican. We need you, Galileo, to stop saying this. It's not right. He said, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's my computations, and here's a telescope. Look for yourself. Famously, they refused to look for themselves. They refused to avail themselves of the means by which they could empirically validate Galileo's findings. You know, we take for granted the empirical method. But it's fairly new in human history. Most of human history, we've taken everything on faith. I'm not against religion by any means, but the church has very often retarded the quest for knowledge. Now, ironically, in this phenomenon, and with the UFO phenomenon, to some extent with paranormal phenomena, the UFO phenomena, and the near-death phenomenon, all three, it is not the religious people knocking on doors saying, stop saying that. Is actually much of the sort of unquestioning scientific orthodoxy has taken the stance that the church once did. And the debunker phenomenon. I know you and I have talked a little bit about the role of debunkers and what place they have in all this, but there is a kind of reflexive, it didn't happen, Whitley Strieber, what you say, because it can't happen.
And they don't back that up with evidence. That's always the answer, right? That's always the answer. No, it didn't happen. Okay, well, why? Well, I don't know, but it just didn't. That's it. That's as far as the argument goes. And isn't it interesting that the Vatican chose to do a press release 2 years ago about ET with the statement that, well, okay, so ET shows up, we can baptize him too, right? It was like, wow, you don't even have to read between the lines on that. And what a contrast that is from the Galileo days, or the Inquisitions, and the violence and heresy. What that brought down on an individual. And now today, what does the Vatican have? They have their own observatories. So it's like really weird. But back to the paradox part of this, which is what I find so interesting, is that we have gone from, and this is another version of paradox, right? Going down rabbit holes. We have gone from 1947 and 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, that era of metal flying saucers, with rivets, and things, to where we are today with the phenomenon where we still have that, and I've seen that, but there's an interdimensional aspect of this, because now the speed of light, faster the speed of light, warp drives, folding of space, wormholes, these things are now part of our thought process. And it is such a paradox from the original UFO hypothesis. And I find that very interesting.
Well, and it goes right to the heart of, I talk about the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947 of 9 objects over Mount Rainier. Ken Arnold was a skilled private pilot. He knew what was up, what belonged in the sky, what made sense in the sky, and what didn't. He saw the speed at which these objects were moving. So I actually cover some new information. I didn't break this story, but I think mine might be one of the first books to really bring it forward. That sighting was what I call the creation myth of UFOs. And I use myth in a positive sense. It's the creation story. Just as in our culture, Judeo-Christian culture, the first book of the Old Testament, Genesis, is our creation story. In the beginning was darkness was spread upon the land and so forth. And out of it came what came of it. Indigenous cultures have the stories that they teach the young people. This is who our people are. This is where they came from. By the way, most often the indigenous people describe their people, our people came from the sky. It's important. Well, I call Kenneth Arnold's sighting of those 9 objects the creation story of ufology. It sort of set the standard of what was to be expected. So the first discrepancy, or paradox, if you will, is that it was reported that he described objects shaped like flying saucers. In fact, he didn't. That was a misreporting of a reporter named Bill Biquette. What Arnold actually said was they moved like saucers would move if they were skipping over water. So it was a description of the way they moved. But hold on to your hat. Some decades later, after Ken Arnold had passed away, there was information that he told his daughter, Kim Arnold. She came forward with it. And here's what she had to say. She goes, Dad was always perplexed by the idea that he saw something made of machines in the sky, technology, nuts and bolts, extraterrestrial. That isn't what he said. What he said to us in the family, and what he didn't say publicly, because he was already considered maybe something of an outlier by being associated with the saucers, okay? He didn't report that what the 9 objects looked like were living, breathing beings, blue-white beings that changed their densities while they apparently breathed, opaque to less dense, opaque to less dense. And he felt they were beating like the human heart. He felt that they were connected with another dimension, and it was somehow a deep intuition, like almost a mystical revelation or realization that they were connected with where we go after this world. They were connected with immortality. So the UFO field assumed this is about extraterrestrial things. Kenneth Arnold, had he told the whole story at the beginning, would have put across something different. He was describing eschatological things. That's a fancy theological term for things relating to the end, ultimate matters, the soul, final purposes, spiritual or religious issues. So the one more piece about this.
Well, yeah, we'll come back to the one more piece about this. I won't let you forget. But what's your takeaway of this biological, I'm inserting a word here, aspect to Kenneth's sighting? What's your takeaway on that?
Well, my takeaway is mostly that he understood that would, I think it was overwhelming for him. The fact that he couldn't tell the world. He told his daughter, and she kept it quiet. It's a good idea for me to tell that other piece. That is when he went home that day, flew back to Boise. He was in Washington and Oregon for the day, flew back to his home in Boise, got in the car, drove to the home. That night, or very soon thereafter, for a series of nights in the family home, they had orbs of light, ORBS, the classic balls of light floating through the air. He had never had anything like that before. Skinwalker, he had something follow him home. Something came home with him. That's another thing he didn't say. So at the very least, if this is extraterrestrial, if what he saw was extraterrestrial in the Steven Spielberg sense, it had a paranormal dimension that was irreducible, couldn't be explained away. He kept that quiet. So there's this subtext of the paranormal, parapsychological part of this phenomenon that I bring forward, not as an opposition to the extraterrestrial, but we need more ways to think about this. We get locked into these hypotheses that there's something in the McDonnell Douglas hangars right now, and Lockheed Martin hangars. You know the story. I know the story. There are claims that have been made. They're empirical. Apparently, David Grush has provided names, dates, and locations. Great, let's have it out. The IG is going to look for all this. But in any case, this has been a recurring belief within the UFO field. Any day now, the lid on the government cover-up is going to blow sky high. Trust me, I had a part in some disclosure effort specifically with Lawrence Rockefeller. I favor greater transparency. I don't poo-poo the disclosure movement. But Jimmy, you know from my book, I believe the greatest disclosure are the events themselves, the phenomena, right, the way they behave. We are the disclosure. This is interacting with us. I'll say one more thing. I used to think that the fact that the debunkers, the agents of official culture in science, academia, and the media would constantly push this back. No, that didn't happen. These things don't happen, and would drive the stories underground. I actually rethink that now. I don't think that they've tried to play gatekeepers, but what has the phenomenon done? It has sought out ordinary people, Betty and Barney Hill, people coming home from bingo, people asleep in their beds who get removed from their beds according to the abduction lore, abduction evidence. So I think this is a phenomenon that is making direct connection. It's as if an intelligence beyond ours, with which we may be connected in some ways that we don't know, is communicating with us symbolically. That's why the subtitle of my book is The Celestial and Symbolic World of Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. So celestial, something seen in the sky, and something is reshaping our symbol system. That's what I try to get at in the way that I approach this topic.
I live 1 mile from Skunkworks. Okay, it's right there. You can see it from my house. Okay, when I say 1 mile, I'm not exaggerating. You could walk there in 2 minutes backwards. Okay, it's right there. It's right there. And I'm here to tell you, and I am telling you this from a position that nobody else in this community has. I live next to Skunkworks. Okay, and so I see stuff daily. Okay, I don't talk about it on the air because there are men and women. There's McDonnell Douglas over there. There's Northrop Grumman. There's Air Force Plant 42. NASA's got a huge setup over there. And my community all works there. So I'm not going to come on the air every night and go, guess what I saw today? I saw this at such and such. No, that's uncool. Plus, everybody knows where I live. And so I don't need a crowd out in front of my house. But so there's that part. Plus, I have to buy food. And there's that. But here's the other thing. Now, I've seen strange stuff. Won't get into it now. This is your show. But I will say this without giving away too much because it's uncool. Quite frequently. Okay, so let's just go with a rectangle. That's the research area here with the perimeter fence. And it's a lot of square miles. Okay. But there's a road that goes around the perimeter fence. Okay. There's Avenue P. There's this over here is called Columbia Way. This is 50th Street East. And down here is Sierra Highway. Okay. So you could drive it. If you just make left turns, you can drive around it. It takes you probably half hour to drive around the entire complex. Quite frequently, they close those streets off. Okay. Now you can drive if the streets aren't blocked. I can take you. I do this all the time with anybody that visits. Jimmy, show me the secret stuff. Let's go. Okay. Right. Jump in the car and we'll go. It's amazing. It's so cool to see. But quite frequently, you drive down the street and they've got it closed off. Highway patrols. That's it. And you can't access. And something is being exposed, but they won't. and photographers. This is the crazy thing, Keith. So the highway patrol and everything, they block all the roads off. You can't get in. You have to turn around or take another street, and they're directing traffic. But what you do see, which is really interesting, is the photographers. So when they close down the streets, they all pull up, right? Aviation, aerospace enthusiasts, all of that, Aviation Weekly, I don't know, Reuters, whatever. But they're all there. Tripods, backs of pickup trucks, all pointing with huge lenses, right? Hoping to catch something. And so something is being moved from hangar to hangar. Maybe it's a runway. I don't know. I can't see it. I can't get close. So to say or suggest that Grush is talking about sensational things, and it just sounds untrue, is the wrong path for most people to go down. When from the stuff that I have seen and the area that I live in, and Edwards Air Force Base is just a couple of miles up the road too as well, and that's a testing facility like Area 51. Same thing, same security. That if you're going to hand off the government to a private corporation and get it out of the military and get it away from FOIA and everything else, that's what you're going to do with it. And from the stuff that I have seen, it appears to me that there's something going on. And I can't really take things much further than that. But I think that there's where there's smoke, there's fire.
Well, if it's the case, and it seems to be that David Grush has given his findings that he's been presented to the Inspector General of the intelligence community, names, dates, locations, actions, then and that's being investigated. If it is being investigated, at what level of a classified level in Congress, etc., then it is more than reasonable to think that the people who are holding whatever it is could be moving around.
Completely. Okay.
They have reason to believe that their location's been busted. They're going to find another location.
So I did talk about, and I was fascinated with this to see this go on. About 2 years ago, for a period of about 6 months, talked about this a lot. I got a lot of video. Ooh, I shouldn't have said that. I don't have any video. I've got no video. I don't need my computer searched. But anyway, for about 6 months, all day and all night, big transport planes taking off. All hours. Big, sometimes 3 in a row, just right on each other's tails and taking off. And it got to the point where I just thought this is the way things were. As everything started to heat up in the UFO community, and the UAP task force reports 1 and 2 come out, and things are really starting to move in Washington, and there were rumors going around about this and that. It was at the same time all of this stuff happened. Since Grush's testimony, nothing. No transport planes. None. And I said to myself publicly, dude, you tipped your hat. You showed your cards, right? You flipped your hand around and just showed it to the table. So if I'm Lockheed, if I'm Air Force Plant 42 or Northrop Grumman, and I've got something and now the possibility of somebody from Congress or a senator, come knocking on the door, we want to see what's in the hangar, is something that's real and possible, then we got to empty this stuff out. It can't stay here. And I definitely 100% agree with you. I saw this going on and I talked about it. I said, they're moving stuff. A lot of it too. It was a lot.
I don't quote intelligence sources in terms to make anything of my own more credible, but because it's just not it's not how I roll with this. But I do have a former intelligence lifelong official who's retired, and he says, Keith, there are two things about this. I would take David Grush, what he's saying, what he's describing, the conversations he describes that he's had about these objects and about the material, you can take it to the bank that he has talked to the people he says he's talked to. And then he also told me, he said, my own approach would have been different. And he's pro-disclosure, my friend. So he was hinting to me and he has his limits that he can talk about. Not that he knows what the facts are in any definitive way, but he's saying the same thing you're saying. That
what was his approach?
Well, it would have been that you just don't take this to the dispatch. You don't take it to, or well, whatever the name of that publication that covered the story. debrief. That you just don't take that. You don't take it to the debrief. You don't do that with that level. You know, the New York Times was the original pitch for this. Maybe it was the Washington Post for Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, and they wanted more time. Yeah, they're journalists. They had the same impulse that Ben Bradley had at the Washington Post back in the 70s. These two cub reporters named Woodward and Bernstein, they were hot on the trail of the Nixon administration and the criminal cover-up of the Watergate matter. As Nixon famously put it, the Watergate matter, which is merely a series of rumors. May I assure you there's nothing that's gone on here. In any case, they would bring these stories into.
That was really good, by the way.
Well, thank you. I don't get to do Nixon much anymore.
That was really good.
So Ben Bradley said to Woodward and Bernstein, I need another source. We can't run with this stuff. Nixon will own the Washington Post if we get something wrong. So they made them go back, talk to Deep Throat in the parking, Hal Holbrook in the movie, and get some more details. Follow the money. Talk to Maurice Stans. I don't know why I remember this, the Secretary of Commerce. I'm an old political junkie. And anyway, they kept digging deeper. They got this 2 and 3 sources per story. So the Washington Post and the New York Times wanted to do the same thing with the Grush stuff. But a TV broadcaster who also interviewed Grush was moving very fast with the story, so they published in the debrief. My friend who's spent his life in intelligence said he would have held back. He would not have, if he were David Grush, approach it differently. Don't put all your cards on the table. Long story short.
Do you think one more? I would love to have dozens, but if one more person came forward with a similar situation like Grush's, would that be enough to like really push this thing into the next square on the chessboard? Because Grush, fantastic as that was, and it was riveting, man. It was unforgettable for sure. But we need more of that. And there's always been this conversation of more whistleblowers coming. There's more coming forward. Well, it hasn't happened yet. Would one more encourage others? And would that validate may not be the right word, but it's the closest I can get to right now. And validate and help support Grush's position?
Yeah, I think that first of all, I've heard there are stories running around about certain of the whistleblowers have been vetted and then they don't have the smoking gun, they're not credible, etc. But I think you're right. I think that if there were somebody else who would come forward, I keep wondering, is there anybody with the let's call it the moxie of the late Daniel Ellsberg? Is there anybody who is willing to really put it all on the table? You lose your clearance, you lose your pension. Well, are there people who could help cover the losses? Is there anybody who's willing to come forward and hold a news conference and say, here's what I know, and provide some evidence at risk of all the things that maybe without whistleblower protection. Ellsberg, I think he was actually convicted, but it was overturned, and he went on to become a cultural hero. I'm just wondering, if there's anybody that's got the goods? I haven't gotten an answer on this. Maybe by raising it tonight, we'll hear from people who say why this is likely or not likely. But where is there somebody who's willing to be the Daniel Ellsberg on the story and come out and say, here's what I know, even though it would violate their security clearance and put them at some kind of risk? Even then, they gain additional credibility.
Well, we have two schools of thought there. You have, if you had a wish list, you've got maybe somebody from the Joint Chiefs, right? Okay, that would be pretty cool, right? 4-star, admiral, not a rear admiral, but you know what I mean? Or the head of engineering of something like Lockheed, General Electric, something like that, a CEO or whatever, to come forward. That's like the ultimate dream, but that would be a game changer. And then, but the other side of it is when we have somebody like Grush, whose CV and work history is as complete and solid as anything that we can imagine. I mean, that's real, that's vettable, that's and he turned around and went to the IG and gave the IG, there's 80 IGs, right? But the intelligence IG, one of them, his evidence. And it was good enough for the Inspector General, right? And so my question is right there. If that is indeed the case, then we have the other side. We have the Hal Putoffs, right? The Kit Greens, that have all been a part of this for a very long time, supposed insiders. Do they know something that we don't, or is it their information secondhand? Because the ones that have the true knowledge, we don't know their names.
Yeah, I noticed this week that there's some there have been some alleged pages from Lou Elizondo's new book.
I've read them.
Yeah, they're being distributed. Whether they are in fact the real pages, whether in fact they were leaked intentionally by the publisher, if they're real, or were they leaked secretly by somebody who's a disgruntled employee, anyway. In any case, there's a discussion between Lou and Hal Putoff, and Hal Putoff says, well, you can say that Roswell is an important case. And Lou says,
he says something like, you can take that to the bank. It happened.
You can take it to the bank, a little bit like my source told me on Grush's
right.
stuff. And Lou says, are you saying, is it very gee whiz? I've never met Lou. I like him in some basic core way. I like his service to our country. And I don't think that disqualifies him, by the way, the fact that he's a patriot and served his country, meaning he's a permanent operative who can't be trusted. Let's see what he says in his book. But in any case, he says to Hal Putoff, well, are you saying that there really was a flying saucer crash and aliens? He goes, yes. Okay, I don't know what else is, what kind of confirmation. But if that's where that ends, first of all, if that is really part of Lou's book, we don't know. We won't know for another month. But if that's where that ends, it's just another drip in rumor. First of all, is Hal Putoff, did he actually say that? If he said it, does he actually believe it? What level of game is going on? I've never met Hal Putoff either. He's got a storied history in all of this, going back to his work with Russell Targ in remote viewing. So in any case, it's a fascinating time to be tracking all of this.
Well, one would have to ask the obvious. How? Okay. You got to look at this three ways. We're back into the spider web, right? Right. There's like 50 questions to ask just off of that one statement from Hal. I would immediately flip it back to Lou going, wait a minute, Lou, you don't have access to this information inside of the Pentagon, that you're having to go to a civilian outside of the Pentagon for these kind of answers. And you didn't know the answer to this, and you had to ask, and you're acting surprised. What you mean? You mean this shit is real, right? To do that kind of feels weird on Lou's part, that he is completely naive and uninformed on the subject matter in general. And number two, there's like three things. The second point is Lou and Hal have had a relationship that's gone back a little bit here now. And for this, if the pages are real, then Hal knows that his name and these conversations are now being published. And Hal has always stood back from the subject, always stood back. He's always just, I'm just a researcher, man. I'm just looking at this just like everybody else, and so forth. So if you take the pages verbatim and that this conversation actually happened, then that means Hal is okay with it. So Hal is one of the gatekeepers. And what evidence can Hal turn around and say, yeah, this is why Roswell is real, because I saw this, and this is where I saw it? Is Hal willing to go on the record? Or the third thing is the pages are bogus and they're way too sensational to be something that would be published. It's like it's too good, right? It's too tasty. It's just too good. So I don't know. That's the three ways to look at those pages. I've read all the pages, got them. Fascinating read. You know, I know Lou pretty well. And I think Lou has made the statement, going back to address your point, that everything is in the book is going to be vettable and backed up, and sources are going to be quoted. So that's a pretty bold statement on Lou's part. And then you read these pages and you're like, holy crap, really? You know, yeah. We'll see.
We're gonna find out next month whether the pages are real. And then secondly, you touched on this. Was this in an early stage in Lou's inquiry? Because there is a gee whiz, golly shucks. Are you saying this is really happening? Mm-hmm. I like to think that was in his early days, because if he really was running I don't doubt that he was running the Pentagon group. I know there are debunkers who like to play with that, but he clearly was at the head of of the Pentagon's secret study. I'm hoping that golly gee whiz response was in his early days, rather than
I don't want to get too off target here, but I'll just make this statement. There's this video, and it's innocent. The video itself is innocent, but it said a lot. And it's Lou over in Italy speaking to an Italian UFO group. And in the video, he shows the cover of, I think it was like Fate magazine, of the UFOs over the Capitol building. Okay. And he says, you know, this is a real photograph. And no, it's not. And anybody in ufology, any researcher that's worth their weight, knows the history behind that photograph. That photograph is the lights of the parking lot and reflecting off of the camera lens. And that's what that photograph is. But Fate magazine, whatever it was, you know, since it's, you know, Crazy Stories or whatever the magazine was, ran with that. And that photograph has been distributed, you know, for decades now, when they talk about the 1952 UFO flap. But it's not a fleet of UFOs over the Capitol building. It's the lights in the parking lot. It's the, you know, on light poles. And Lou showing that, like I said, it's an innocent mistake. It shows how naive he was to the subject. He just saw the story behind it, and just wanted to flout it as being an authentic photograph. And it wasn't. And I saw the video and it was like, well, okay. It's an honest mistake from somebody that has no background in ufology yet. He may have been doing stuff with the Pentagon, but as far as UFO lore and history and subject matter, no. And it takes a long time. You've been at this for how many years? 30, 40 years?
Actually, over 50, because I started in the sixth grade. That's
sixth grade.
My current events report. And so that's I'm one of the members of the field now with Jacques. Jacques' a little older.
Lou can't learn everything that you've acquired over 5 decades in a couple of weeks. It's impossible.
No, he can't. And he's probably going to be describing in the book what he's described already, that he had a pretty full portfolio as it was. And his senior officer called him in one day and said, "Lou, by the way, what do you think of UFOs?" "I beg your pardon, sir. What do you think of UFOs?" "Well, sir, I don't think anything of UFOs. I don't have any opinions. I've heard about them, but no." And that was what Lou says. That's what the senior officer wanted to hear. He didn't have any pre-orientation, predisposition, positive or negative. He said, "Well, here's an additional item I'm putting on your agenda. You're now in charge of what we're doing here on UFOs, or UAP, as we now call them." So that's if that's what he reports, that's probably what he's going to describe in his book, how he came to be doing this.
Now, before we head to the break, and we'll continue this conversation when we come back, but before we head to the break, when it comes to John Mack, I never interviewed him. Okay, there are a few that got away, and John Mack was one of them. And wow! But I often wonder, and I've asked Ralph this, and I've asked a few people that knew him really well. What was it that for him flipped the switch? He connected. There was something going on with all of his sessions and the people that he was getting information from, and those experiencers and abductees and whatever noun you want to use. Something clicked, and he never talked about that, and nobody asked him either. That would have been my first question to John Mack out of the gate. Okay, dude, what was it? What do you think it was?
How much time did we have before the break?
We can do it. It's your show, Keith.
Okay, well, I just want to know.
I'm just the guest. You're the host.
No, well, thank you. We're mutually guests and hosts, I think. I'm loving the way this is unfolding, by the way. John, it's interesting. John Mack came up with a different pool of witnesses or experiencers compared with David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins, who found something else. So what was the reason that John Mack's experiencers seemed more inclined to have transformative outcomes, positive outcomes? Well, it had to do with the fact that how John Mack got into this. He had gone to California to Esalen Institute, the famous Human Potential Inquiry Educational Center, where Stanislav Grof, the world's leading authority on the scientific investigation of psychedelics, specifically LSD, had taken up residence as a scholar in residence. At that point, Grof had moved beyond LSD research because it was illegal now. So he and his late wife, Christina Grof, developed this method of self-exploration, self-inquiry called holotropic breathing, which is a method by which one explores one's consciousness through regulated breathing with music and so forth. That method, John tried it on because he was at a time in his life when he was open. His consciousness was open. He, like I've described in myself, he knew that there was something, he'd had some experiences, frankly, that led him to believe there's more to reality than the materialist Freudian framework in which he'd been educated. So, using that method of holotropic breath work and doing some psychedelic exploration of his own, John opened his consciousness very wide and went very far, Jimmy. So he really felt we needed an entire new model beyond the physicalist materialist framework. This put him in a very different camp from Hopkins and Jacobs. And so that's a preliminary stand I'll take. John, he left this world much too soon. He was on the verge of doing his third book. He had it partly written. I think he would have, I don't know where he would have gone, but he was asking big questions about the ultimate nature of reality and had begun to really rethink his early assumptions about the abductions. He really began to feel they didn't make full sense as mere physical events, only physical, hardcore kidnapping events in the way that both Hopkins and Jacobs felt. That they come from this world, they come from another world, they impact this world, they interact in this world, they leave physical traces, but are fugitive traces. They're easy to deny. So John was looking for a model of physicality and consciousness that could accommodate the data rather than, in fact, he often spoke about this. Why do we feel so constrained to try to push this phenomenon into our pre-established Newtonian Cartesian model of science? Why aren't we willing to let it take us? Why don't we follow the data into a larger worldview in which we ask about the fundamental nature of consciousness? And then, way too soon, John lost his life when he stood in the wrong side of the street in London.
Crossed the road, man. He crossed the road in London. So, but we'll get to a break in a second because this is too important. I want to stay right here. John was an intellectual, as we all know. He's a teacher, he's a professor, Harvard, and all of that. And so you run in those circles, and those circles are, which is what we need, by the way, are basically data driven. Okay. And that's fine. We need that. You need observation, you need measurement, you collect the data, and hopefully it supports your theory. Right? Okay. That's the scientific method. I'm cool with that. And so I know that all of us have a moment in our lives when something is confirmed to us, whatever it is, whatever it is, but you get that confirmation. And it could be about bicycles when you're a kid. It could be about Santa Claus, and it could be about UFOs, or it could be about Operation Northwoods or some conspiracy, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. But you go, holy crap, this stuff is real. There's something that happens, and that happened with John Mack. And I can just imagine him standing up, at his house or in his office, just hands on his hips going, okay, all right, it's real. And what was it? Right? There was something, and man, he took it with him. We'll never know.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think in some way it was maybe he and I, we had so many conversations. Maybe it was in some sense our conversations that could have furthered his interest. I'll tell you why. He contacted me when Stan Groff, who I just mentioned, gave him an article that Groff was about to publish in an anthology on spiritual emergency, on all those experiences in life that come as a spiritual emergency when something changes in our makeup and we're called to something new, and it often comes as a crisis. Spiritual emergence often comes as an emergency, the dark night of the soul. So I had given a talk to a group of UFO researchers out at Leo Sprinkle's Rocky Mountain UFO conference. And I described the UFO encounter as a kind of rite of passage or an initiation. So John read this piece and he said, Stan Groff, I need to contact him. I want to get in touch with him. I want to talk with this guy about it. So I get an email from John Mack, who I knew who he was. He wrote the famous Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Lawrence of Arabia and Physicians for Social Responsibility. So I said, oh, there's John Mack, wants to meet. We wanted to talk. So we got together. He said, Keith, I love what you did with comparing these to an initiatory process. Great. But you said in doing that, you set the reality issues aside in order to make those comparisons with initiation. Fine. But are they real? Let's put the reality issues back on the table. And I said, exactly, that's the question. He said, well, what are you finding? So we talked about the stuff in the new physics. We talked about the entangled particles. We talked about non-locality. And he knew the evidence for paranormal research. And as I say, he had begun to do psychedelics in an exploratory way. and this evocative breath work called holotropic breath work. So he went through some profound experiences that of a kind that neither Hopkins nor Jacobs was open to. Jacobs, as I describe in the book, bless his heart for his courage as a historian at Temple for even going into this, but he describes the selection bias. He doesn't call it that, but Temple, excuse me, Dave Jacobs from Temple systematically removed people from his abductee pool who had spiritual experiences, who had spiritual beliefs. That is a really, so John went the other way. He said, if you've had spiritual beliefs, maybe that's relevant to what you're involved in. Maybe this is a psychophysical, biomythological, that's a term John liked to use. Is it biomythological? Is the mythology that Joseph Campbell and that you talk about, does it have a biological dimension? He was asking big questions.
Well, and the problem that I like David Jacobs. I do. But when you look at the historical reference of this, you can't throw the baby out, right? You just can't do that. And David chose to do that. To me, when you look at the deep historical context that is not only been written but handed down and passed down orally in oral traditions through so many different cultures of a phenomenon that we describe the same way today. We look at it as an ET context, but it's certainly interdimensional and orbs and things. But back then, it was spirits, it was religion, it was gods, it was angels, right? And so if somebody's religious or and looks at these ideas and these concepts in a religious way, we're talking about the same thing. We're just using different words. And that was a big problem with the overarching conclusions that David Jacobs came to. And one other comment, and then I want your answer on David. David also, he really, the hybrid taking over the earth general sense that he projected out there seemed too inclusive to me. He didn't allow other areas of consideration.
Exactly. And near the end of one of his books, when he's describing the method that I gently critiqued, I'm not a debunker. I was not trying to rule the abductions off the table as a class of evidence. I said, why contaminate it by being so selective? By excluding people with spiritual and paranormal experiences, we're excluding the possibility this thing could be a whole lot weirder than we think. It might be a more of a fundamental challenge to our worldview. In any case, Temple, in his description that I quote, he actually confessed near the end. He said, I realize that the hypnosis has a lot of problems. It's not the best way to try to recover these memories, but we're limited with what we have. And he said, I've also paid a huge price by even touching on this phenomenon at all as a professional historian. And he gradually recognized, and he admitted, he said, I think there are questions that my research doesn't answer. It doesn't surface all the things. And I think he was hinting in his own way, the kind of stuff that John Mack was sort of trying to pick up the ball and run with. And then the question is, for the future, where does the research into experiencers go? That's,
but you bring up the best point of all. And it's this: if we go back and revisit Kenneth Arnold's sighting, and that sighting didn't happen in 1947, but it happened at 2000 BC, 1000 right. BC, 0. That's angels and demons.
That's right. Another framework entirely. And by the way, this is where Jacques Vallée was so misunderstood when he came forward in 1968, 1969, after seeming to be with Hynek and being a mainstream researcher, even taking seriously the ET as the most likely at one point, or most probable. He then wrote this book, Passport to Magonia, which his story about how he wrote that book in about a week during the Paris 7-day strike in 1968. He described that to a group of us recently in a private conversation. In any case, he did exactly the expanding of the boundaries you're describing. He said, with this franchise, that these phenomena have been happening throughout all of history. Why would we rule out of bounds an entire body of data? If it's a crime scene investigation, why would we declare the yellow tape is here? Why would we not push to include as much? He understood that the archetypes that are underlying the abduction phenomenon are present in shamanism. They're present in the Celtic fairy faith, where fairies abduct children. And when he wrote that book, people said, "Oh, Vallée has lost the plot. He's gone off the rails. He now is reducing all of this to mythology." He said, "No. I'm using mythology to expand the boundaries. This has not been going on since Kenneth Arnold. It didn't start then." So that's the path I'm committed to. That's the path Jeffrey Kripal at Rice University, he's tracking the same thing in his work. I'm getting, by the way, a strong sense in the podcasts I've been doing for this book so far, Jimmy. There's a growing openness to the need to include multiple frames of reference: the psychedelic literature, the shamanism literature, the fairy faith, the paranormal, vast body of evidence for paranormal research, and the saucer frame of reference, the specific UFO frame of reference. Bring it all together, not as some big mush pile, but looking for reasonable parallels. That's how science proceeds. I say in the book, as you know, if Charles Darwin, when he was doing his field work, the British gentleman with his backpack, he was collecting samples of fossils and bones and so forth. If he had picked up 3 or 4 fossils, and then he picked up the 5th and said, "This one doesn't appear to fit the pattern, I'm going to put it back on the ground." No, he picked up the 5th one and the 6th one. And that's how he came to this vast theory about the origin of species. He didn't reject data simply because it didn't fit his preconceptions. That's what this field needs to do next. We need to kind of open all this up. And that's what I'm interested in doing. That's what my book is all about.
Let's take our break right here. Good spot. Well done, Keith. Now we can segue after the break. Our guest tonight, Keith Thompson. We're talking about his book and the subject, the UFO Paradox. Stay with us. We'll be right back. This is Fade to Black. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. Hi, this is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and I want to invite you to come to Alaska with me on the Contact at Sea cruise. It is this September 6th through the 13th, 2024. We are on the largest ship in the Pacific Ocean. That's right, the Ovation of the Seas. It's an amazing cruise, and a ship this big is so much fun. We've got lots of activities and lots of great speakers. We are leaving from Seattle to Sitka, Alaska, Skagway, Juneau. We're going to end the cruise in Victoria, BC, and arrive in Seattle on September 13th. We've got a lot of amazing speakers, including we've got Seth Shostak, Scott Walter, Stephen Bassett, Daniel Sheehan, Daryl Sims, Mas Adi, Vivian Chavez, Grant Cameron, Geraldine Orozco, Misha Johnston, and Melanie Aguirre, and a whole lot more. All you have to do is go to divinetravels.com. You can also go to contactatsea.com. Both are going to take you to a full event schedule. You can check in, look at the boat, get things ready to go, and maybe get a cabin with a balcony. That's what I'm talking about. Come see the whales. Come check it all out. Let's go to Alaska this September 6th through the 13th, 2024 with me, Jimmy Church. Now, when you head to divinetravels.com or contactatsea.com and get signed up, you know what? Use my name, Jimmy Church. I'll see you there September 6th through the 13th, 2024. Let's go to Alaska. This is Jimmy Church. Please visit and explore Egypt this October 3rd through the 14th, 2024 with Billy, Elizabeth, myself, and very special guest and the #1 podcaster in the world, Sean Kelly. It's simple to do. Just go to forbiddenknowledge.com and click on upcoming tours, or click on the link below. We'll see you there. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's fade to black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black T-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 T-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. Get your Fade to Black T-shirt today. Go Beckley Teppy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, our guest, Keith Thompson. We're talking about his book and his research. The book is called The UFO Paradox, and you can get it right now on Amazon. We have links below and so forth, and also in the chat. Now, Keith, when we look at certain aspects of, and you write about Ariel, which is a very important UFO case. You and I were talking about other cases like that before the show, and different Jacques Vallée and Hynek and Zamora and Socorro. You know, these are physical, beings, craft, a physical situation. But I flip that over always and go, okay, well, how did they get here? And then, because I've had my own sightings, and I personally have seen what other witnesses have seen, which is stuff appear and then disappear right in front of me, right? And so then I get pulled in this other direction. I'm seeing something physical. I've seen stuff, daylight, do that during the day. And so there's the physical. So now, are we getting into physical nuts and bolts stuff, or is it interdimensional? Is it something that's here on this planet already and is just appearing in front of us in an interdimensional sense? Or is it interdimensional from the multiverse coming here and then becoming physical? It's like, talk about a paradox. It's trying to unwrap all of this. What's your position on this, and how do you think they are getting here?
Where do they come from? Now, as for if they are extraterrestrial craft, as that's in some of their manifestations, some phase of their manifestation they seem to be, then that's for the physicists to maybe explain with, for example, string theory that posits there is either 11 or 26. They go back and forth dimensions. I mean, the physics of multiple universes and parallel dimensions can explain that. Or a straight extraterrestrial hypothesis. I know the challenges to that. Avi Loeb seems to think that's where to place the bet. But Carl Jung talked about, he said, these are almost like materialized psychisms. They're almost as if something from the deepest realms of what he called the unconscious, which is not a place inside us, but we are in the unconscious. That was his framework eventually, the collective unconscious. So is it possible that well, he believed it is possible, that the evidence shows that the line between the physical and the material is permeable. If what we know about paranormal phenomena in the entangled particles, entangled photons case alone, which materialist philosophers and scientists did their best to bat down the findings of entangled photons, entangled particles. They couldn't do it. Einstein tried very hard. He didn't like the idea of spooky action at a distance. And it's to his credit, he worked really hard to see if there was a conventional explanation for the photons. Turned out there's not. So, the question is, what is the nature of reality such that these events could be happening, is the larger question for me. And I want to see more. So I don't answer that definitively in the book, but I do talk about how the synchronicity as a phenomenon, with the way that it cuts across the boundary of mind and matter, is crucial. And in many ways that we have this in our midst more often than we think. The telephone rings. You've been thinking that morning about a friend for some reason from high school that you haven't had any contact with for 20, 30 or more years. Your friend Brad. And you go to the phone and you pick it up. It says, Keith, you won't believe this. This is Brad from high school. Just been thinking about you. I wanted to get in touch to see how you are. That's a synchronicity. That is more than a coincidence. That's a meaningful connection between the psychic and the physical. Those other events where we're at the grocery, you have a strange feeling someone's staring at you, looking at you. You turn around and it is. The person's a little embarrassed. They weren't meaning any harm. The point is, how did you know that? So in our ordinary lives, we have these intimations of a larger universe that come in moments. We call them peak experiences. We know that we're part of a larger game in those moments. I've had my own experiences that have suggest that we're part of this body. This life is part of a larger body, a larger life that mysticism, religious traditions, and so forth point to. I think that body of data needs to be brought in. We need more mystics, people who have had these direct experiences of primordial reality, to come forward and to bring that evidence into the mix. So,
yeah, Carl Jung's approach and that book, Carl, I think Jung on UFOs or whatever that book is called, is his take was very interesting and it was very forward thinking. But I think it's you have 360 degrees, right? Jung's version of it is just 1 degree. It's one of something. The universe is just too big. It's got to be an infinite amount of not only advanced life out there, but what knows about planet Earth and who visits here. It's got to be so wide and so varied and so different. But back to your point, Jung's approach to it was very similar to what Jacques Vallée started to talk about, and where we are today. Jacques has been talking about this now for over 50 years, and that it may not, it's physical too, yes, but it's something else that we just completely don't understand. And it's possibly interdimensional, and it's not physical at all. And that's where we are today. And that's what science is starting to support. And that's why I think Jung's approach to this is so important, because it was very forward thinking. I think he wrote that. I think that was like 1955, if I'm right.
I think you're right. And what's amazing, or what's interesting about Jung that I resonate with in my own work, he spent most of his life, after breaking from Freud and moving into a much larger model of the unconscious, rather than the unconscious seen merely as the personal repository of things that the ego doesn't like. So we push away, those qualities that we don't like about ourselves. So we push that away into the unconscious. Jung said, yes, that's true. But there's a much deeper level of the collective unconscious that is much closer. Now, if we want to really expand this conversation, it's much closer to the Akashic records, namely that all information and all wisdom from all times and all human experience are continuously available to us in the deepest states, through memory, through altered states of consciousness. It isn't really surprising that so much profound spiritual experience does happen through trauma. The sense in which there's a deep rupture, usually, in your sense of what is ordinary reality. John Mack had a phrase, he adopted it from other psychological dimensions, but he talked about ontological shock. Ontological is from ontology, the branch of philosophy that deals with the very nature of meaning. If you've been in a hurricane, you've been through a natural disaster, you lost your house, your home, maybe family members, that is an ontological shock. Your world is turned upside down. Exactly the case with what those students at Ariel saw. It's what Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson at Pascagoula saw, two men out fishing in 1973. My favorite chapter of my book is called The Matter of Pascagoula. I got in touch with Calvin Parker, who died last year after I went to see him. As far as I know, there's no connection. He was a magnificent character, late 70s, maybe early 80s at the time, invited me to come to Pascagoula to revisit the case. Anyway, these cases, these are profound ruptures in the sense of reality. And in both his case and Emily Trim, one of the students at Zimbabwe, there was a long period when they were not dealing with what had happened to them. They weren't addressing it. In Emily's case in Zimbabwe, the Ariel school, she was told by her parents, in effect, they took her out of that school. She and her little brother took them back to Canada. They were religious, fundamental Christians. They told Emily, that didn't happen. So put it out of your head. That is not the best way to deal with a hurricane that has taken your house, metaphorically speaking. Well, Emily didn't thrive in her life during her 20s because she wasn't dealing with it. She got an invitation to come back to Ariel school. It was a class reunion. She went back. Happened that she got an opportunity to meet with a local spiritual indigenous teacher and he said, why have you come to see me? She said, because I'm trying to figure out what I should do, you're having trouble putting it into words, because something that you have not said is keeping, you must say what you saw that day, Emily. She said, my parents said not to talk about it. I respect your parents. You must say what you saw. You were a child and you had the truth with you. So she went back to Canada, and she did the work she needed to do, is the point. I talk about these as a kind of rite of passage. It's a major theme of my book. The 3 stages of a rite of passage. You are separated. The hero in the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell described. He goes on an adventure. Very often, it's not I think I'll go on an adventure today. No, very often you're going about your ordinary business and something happens that transforms your way of thinking. You're separated from the reality as you know. You're cast into a vast middle range of marginal, transitional, you're neither here nor there. You're officially in no man's land, no person's land. And then finally, the culmination is to come back to the community with some wisdom gained after dealing with the adversaries in the spiritual and psychological sense and the social sense, and also the allies who will come to your assistance in a mythological sense, in a heroic sense, and help you bring something back to the community. So Emily Trim brought back her artwork, which began to thrive again. And Calvin Parker finally decided to write his book about Pascagoula. When he did, and finally came forward after hiding out for decades, other witnesses came forward, Pascagoula, to his book signing and said, Calvin Parker, we've been waiting for you to come back. We wondered where you went. We saw it too, and we stayed quiet because we saw what happened to you. Thank goodness you're coming and telling your story. Well, so I use that accent because I hung out with those people. I talked to those other witnesses. So other witnesses came forward when Calvin had the moxie to come forward and finish the experience. So I write a lot in the book about how experiencers need to have the opportunity, and we need to work with experiencers to help them culminate these experiences.
Let's stay with Calvin for a second. When I finally got him on the show, which was right before he passed, so it was probably 3 years ago, he was on the show. And take the time later, Keith, go back and listen to that interview.
Okay.
And because it was fascinating, and I just found him, I don't have another word to use. I'm just going to use the word cool. That's a cool dude. Just a cool dude. Cool. Very nice. But you go back, and I just talked about this last week on the show, so I'm so glad you brought this up. You go back, and the best evidence of that entire case, not the witnesses, not what he said, none of that, and it's all great. It's that tape. It's that tape that the police recorded when they leave the room and they leave the two of them alone, and the trauma that those two and listening to them trying to make sense, right, of and that is the best evidence of that entire that thing. What's your take on that tape and the emotion that is captured there?
Well, it's a story that really belongs. I hope some screenwriter reads my book for their sake and uses that story. It'd be a great movie, because these two men were fishing, and Calvin and Charlie, and Calvin was a good number of years younger. He was a friend of Charlie's son. Anyway, they loved to fish. They went out to the Pascagoula River one night, and Calvin saw that it was a no trespassing sign, private property. He turned to Charlie and said, "You're fixing to get us arrested. This is private property. We ought not to be fishing here." Charlie said, "Oh, don't worry. We never get caught back here." So they cast their lines out, and there came behind them onto the water blue flashing light. And Calvin says to Charlie, "Well, I told you. Now we got to do you. Now you're going to have to get me out of jail. You're going to have to pay my bail because the police are here," or so they assumed. They turned around hoping to see. They would have been lucky to see the police. It wasn't the police. It was this craft. It had landed. It took them in. These two creatures came out. It was a classic robot type creatures, and gave them physical examinations involving a seemingly CAT scan, a CT scan that did not really exist at the time. They were put back on the shore. Charlie said, "We need to warn all of Mississippi. There might be an invasion. We're going to call the police." Calvin said, "We're not going to call the police. We're going to go to work tomorrow morning. We're not going to lose our jobs by being witnesses to this. It will not work out well for us, Charlie." So in any case, they went to the police. The police split them up, as you say, did classic criminal justice, tried to separate the witnesses, asked for them to tell the story over and over and over. Finally, time came when Sheriff Diamond had the idea, put them in a room with a tape recorder hidden, voice activated in a drawer they don't know about. Put them in the room, said, "We'll let you guys spend a little time here together." And at that point, Charlie said, we've been here all night. Can we not go home? We don't want this to have even happened. So in any case, close the door, and you're right. The transcript of this, which I have in the book, was later described by the sheriff. If these boys were making this up, if they were acting, they deserved to be in Hollywood. That was these young men, these men saw something real. They experienced something real. The trauma in their voices, the terror in their voices. It was such that Calvin Parker eventually changed his name in life, not as legally. He didn't change his name legally. He went by the name Randy. I don't know his last name. He literally took jobs under an assumed name. He didn't want to be that Calvin Parker. And it was only when he went to a funeral of a close friend with his wife, whose name I can't recall at the moment. I'm going to say Waveline, but that isn't quite right. Wynette. They went to the funeral, and Calvin wasn't thinking. He signed his name, Calvin Parker, on the register. And the guy behind him said, "Well, you're Calvin Parker. You're Calvin. This is Calvin Parker right here of the abduction." Calvin realized he'd outed himself, and he said, "We can't have this." He said to his wife, "We can't do a man's funeral this way." And on the way out to the car, his wife turned to him and said, "Calvin, it's time to write that book. It's time." And do you know, even to that point, after decades of being together, Jimmy, he had never fully told his wife, Wynette, what had happened, because she had never asked him. She had a trust that whatever had happened to him that day, which she knew the story from the press, but he had never turned to her and told her the whole story. He said to me, "Mr. Thompson, I don't know how you have lived with your relationships, but have you ever kept a secret for 30 years from your spouse or your partner? It takes an incredible toll." He had this droll understatement about
No
it.
kidding. And unless you and I are old enough to remember, but unless you were around, you don't understand that all the comedians, all the talk shows, all of the running joke was a couple of yokels in a Louisiana swamp and an abduction, and Calvin and Hickson seriously had to deal with that, and it was relentless. This went on for years. So, and I totally got to talk to Calvin about that at length, because the trauma that people go through today with social media, and they're going at it, and people getting gaslighted, and all. Just think about what somebody like Calvin Parker's gone through, or Travis Walton, or Whitley Strieber, and for them to constantly stay out there in the public eye and keep this moving forward. Calvin, Parker and Hickson, they were the brunt of late night humor for probably 5 straight years.
Well, that's why he became Randy. That's why he chose the name Randy. And when he finally decided to write the book, which, by the way, he had a publisher on the dime. A publisher had been after him. "Mr. Parker, we'd like you to write this book. You can write it however you want." And the reason he did not want, he was so authentic. The reason he didn't want to write a book when he was hiding out as Randy or pretending to be somebody but he's not, was because he said, "I'm not a professional writer. I don't know fancy things like grammar and spelling and so forth. And I'm not going to write a book if I have to correct all the spelling. I want to write it just the way I talk and think." No publisher's going to want to do that. Well, the publisher did come on and said, "All right, you can write it the way." If you read his book, it's not, they didn't correct it. They didn't.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. And I'm telling you, that show that I did 3.5 hours with Calvin.
Oh,
that is a smart, just a down guy, man. You just can't help but like the guy, and you can feel the emotion and the truthfulness behind his voice. Very, very authentic.
I thought a lot about when I spent time with Calvin down in Pascagoula, which is as deep south as it gets in the United States.
Yeah.
You're in the Gulf of Mexico if you're further south than Pascagoula, that is, and Pensacola, pretty much, Florida. I was reminded of a statement Carl Sagan had made in a moment of real honesty. Not that he wasn't an honest person most of the time. I don't think of him much around that issue, but he let slip or made a statement about Calvin and Charlie in that way that he did. You know, the billions and billions of stars, we're living in the most vast universe. He said, "I always wondered why, if this was really happening, if these abductions were real, why they would pick on people like these yokels from Mississippi rather than come to see astronomers such as myself." And I thought, well, Carl, you've just outed yourself. You've got encounter envy. You don't like the fact that they're seeking out yokels like Hickson and Parker. They should be coming to talk to you at your esteemed places of learning. Well, maybe they know what they need to know about you, and they have another calculus.
Well, that's always the problem too. ET, ET, let's assume more advanced than us, and they've been studying this planet, different extraterrestrial civilizations, right? Been studying. They know all about us. They know our fears, our likes, our dislikes. They know about Elvis Presley, right? They know all that stuff. They do. And so the last person that they're going to talk to when they come here is Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's not going to happen. It's not going to be Carl Sagan. It's not. Maybe eventually, but right now, no, too dismissive, too reductionist. Right?
Well, also, I'm struck by Tyson. I give him credit in a certain kind of way, a little bit like Sagan. They're almost like they've been given unknowingly a shot of sodium pentothal, and they're saying things that are not in the service of their credibility. In particular, Dr. Tyson will often say when he's on a podcast dealing with UFOs, he'd begin by saying, now, of course, I don't take any of this seriously, and I haven't delved very deeply into the cases, because at face value, this is folklore. It's very dismissive. To begin by saying, I don't take it very seriously, I don't delve into the cases, I don't make myself familiar with the data, why the TV and why the media world trots out these so-called scientists, TV scientists, when in fact it would be like me saying to Tyson, who I don't know, I would like to come to your next astrophysics conference, hopefully as a keynote speaker. Oh, great, Keith, what's your background in astrophysics? I don't have much. I haven't familiarized myself with the data, but I have opinions. I have strongly formed opinions about the data that I'm not familiar with. How far would that get me? But anyway, so I like you, at the end of the day, I don't worry about the debunkers, except they are not living up to anything like the genuine spirit of science that Galileo represented. And people like Dean Radin now doing the best paranormal research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and others. These are the bold people who are following the evidence wherever it leads, just like my sixth grade teacher told me to do.
Yeah, well, see, here I can break it down really simply. The best question to ask Neil deGrasse Tyson and others like him, but specifically Neil, let's pick on him a little bit, is, I would say, what proof do you have that ET has not been to this planet? He can't answer that. Now, Neil, ask me the same question. Okay, Jimmy, what proof do you have? I've seen it. I've seen it. That's it. That the conversation just stops right there. There's nothing that he can come back from. He can't tell me that me and my friends and everybody that was there imagined it, or it was an illusion, or it was this. No, you can't say that. That's not what. No, you can't. And that's just all theory on his side. That's opinion on his side. It's not any proof. And that's it. It just shuts the whole thing down.
He might try to get you, well, how do you know it's extraterrestrial? And you might say, well, I don't know. In fact, it's extraterrestrial. Could be other dimensions, but I have firsthand experience, regardless of the origin, Dr. Tyson. That would be just as, and he would have to admit, I mean, certainly the evidence, the new theories, string theory and other multiple universes stuff is very congenial to the kind of questions this phenomenon should be provoking and evoking, and actually is. The philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn, in his famous book The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, describing how a prevailing paradigm or worldview holds up, it's coherent, it's credible, it makes sense, until there begin to be cracks in the dam. Anomalies begin to appear. At first, it's assumed that the anomalies merely have to do with the methods of the study. Maybe the studies weren't designed quite right. We're getting weird data. So you correct for that. Then there appear to be another class, a whole level of anomalies. And the anomalies become too many. So the paradigm enters a crisis in scientific terms. And I think we're approaching a paradigm crisis. It's not going to happen overnight. There's not going to be a new paradigm declared in the New York Times. New paradigm arrives, scientists agree to secure new funding. But the anomalies are going to continue to gather steam and momentum. I think the near-death field is particularly promising because it's the one field that the resuscitation techniques have advanced to the point where 1 out of 20 Americans has had a near-death experience. I had one in my 20s before Raymond Moody's book. So I had no map for the tunnel, for the encounter with dead people, dead relatives, out-of-body experiences, psychic overhearing of conversations with my friends on the beach. It was a near drowning. I was body surfing and I kind of lost my way. I overheard conversations that I could not have heard given the distance and the sound of the waves. So that rocked my world. And the near-death phenomenon there's really good science on this now. So that's a major one. The UFO phenomenon isn't far behind. Psychic phenomena has been established because the studies around psychic phenomena, Jimmy, as you know, tend to be double-blind, triple-blind. The gold standard, because parapsychologists have to go so hard just to get any attention. So they really conduct very good studies. And the best you get from the materialist scientist who says, well, it does appear there's a signal amidst the noise. There does appear to be a phenomenon we could call psychic. But, and they say, well, but what? Well, but we don't know the mechanism. We can't explain how it works. How is knowledge transmitted across time and space, non-locally? That's a question. That should be the question that we open the conversation with, rather than, well, I'm not going to talk about it. There's good reasons not to talk about it. Scientists lose their funding if they bring paranormal stuff to their day job. So,
well, it's such a great point, because in Brian Greene's latest book, Till the End of Time, I don't know if you've read it, but if you haven't, you should.
I know about it. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Get it. Read it. I've read it 100 times, and that's not an exaggeration. But at the end of the book, so what he does is he till the end of time, right? So he pushes the dates forward. It's not trillions of years. It's trillions to the power of 20, right? It's just like a number. So at the end of everything, right? Matter comes apart. The particles fall apart. There's nothing left. There's nothing but blackness out there. This is what he says. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but this is what he says. He says, all that is going to be left is thought and thinking. Now, analyze it, break that down for a second. And he describes it really well. That thought and thinking and memory of all that ever was is all that's going to be left. And it's going to be floating around in the vastness of nothing. But it still needs energy to run. So it's going to look for the lone energized particle dashing through the vastness of space and gobble it up so it can continue. Now, is he talking about consciousness? Is he talking about the Akashic records? Is he talking about where is Brian going with this? And I realize, and I know that he's trying to wax philosophical, but still stay in bounds to his fan base and to the funding environment that he's in, right? So he can't use the word consciousness, right? He can't say Akashic records. But it's a fascinating conclusion that he comes to when he wraps up the book. It's just absolutely fascinating.
Well, there's an almost Monty Python surrealism about the fact that in today's contemporary philosophical and scientific discussions about consciousness, the so-called hard problem of consciousness is how does dead matter, which we believe in materialism and physicalism, simply inert molecules that have no purpose, any meaning, value, or intent, purely material phenomena, somehow give rise to the capacity to taste the sweetness of an apple, to feel the bitterness of heartbreak, subjective experience, the sense that there's something that it is like to be Jimmy Church or Keith Thompson, that sense of I am here. How does that emerge out of that dead stuff? Well, maybe it's backwards. Maybe it's Monty Python as to how does consciousness develop out of dead matter? But how do we imagine that consciousness is not the ground of being? It is nothing we know exists outside of consciousness. Every conversation we have presupposes consciousness, awareness as the frame. So that's a beautiful, I cannot wait to read that book. And I think
it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And I enjoy Brian a lot. And in those rock star, you were talking about that, those rock star physicists, out of all of those cats, Brian has the more opened mind. He chases the data, and see the difference. I think Neil is on the verge of flipping. It depends on where his paycheck is coming from, by the way, because you watch the TV series, the remake of Cosmos. Neil is talking about alien life on every episode, right? Go watch Cosmos, right? But then when he needs to just solidify this position of not freaking out his fan base. So he just wants to stay right there, but he can't deny the data. And the data is, when Neil first got into the game 25 years ago, 1995, 30 years ago, there were no exoplanets. There weren't. Right. And now today, that's all there is exoplanets, right? So how much life is out there? And the answer is, it's a number so big we don't know. And Neil is fully aware of that. And he's going to want to be on the right side of history. And Neil is also fully aware, as is, guys like Sean Carroll and Brian Greene and Michio Kaku, that science is nothing but a long string of corrections.
Yes.
That's it. You have to have very thick skin. If you want to be a physicist, you want to be a theoretical physicist, you want to be an astrophysicist, you want to be a physicist, you have to have thick skin, because whatever you do, whatever numbers you put together, whatever theory that you want to have become law, and you want your name in the history books, eventually you're going to be proven wrong.
I wish all the scientists who are not open to anything beyond their framework, I wish them all well. And I would remind them all what Thomas Kuhn said at the end of his study of how paradigms change. Science proceeds one funeral at a time. Namely, eventually, and again, I wish all of them well, but science advances, knowledge advances when people who refuse to change eventually just die off. And I think we're now living in a time when enough young scientists are coming into these things. They've had psychedelic experiences. They've studied the psychedelic literature. They know the NDE stuff. They know the data of UFOs. They understand that consciousness is something that has to be wrestled with, and they're open to it. So, in our lifetime, we may see some important shifts.
Yeah, and I think that we are right on the edge of it. And we started off the show talking about, Galileo and Copernicus and Newton, and what I find that if you look up ironic or irony, right, and look at the classic definition of that, right, look at the classic definition. Well, that is, or paradox, by the way, if it actually fits into there, is that look at Galileo, then turn around and look today at what Harvard attempted to do to John Mack. And now today, that very same university is where we have Avi Loeb. What is that? Is that irony? Is that ironic? Is that the classic definition?
That's a plot structure for something out of Hollywood. No, you've absolutely completed a really important loop there. And it's just too bad John is not here to keep furthering the ball. He really intended. Maybe he's doing it from wherever he is now. There are reports that people get a sense of him through psychic communications and so forth. But even apart from that, just let that alone. you're right about the irony and the paradox of these great institutions that have Thomas Crookes, one philosopher of science, said something that I come back to a lot. He said, "I never said it was possible. I only said it was true." And he was referring to these kind of phenomena. I don't know how it's possible. I never said it is. It's impossible, according to our theories. But it's also true. It's impossible, and it's happening.
Well, Leonard Stringfield, Lenny, yeah, I call him Lenny like we're best friends. But Lenny probably says it best, right? Everything is possible and will eventually happen. All of it. Your craziest thought, the most insane thing that you can think of, may not happen tomorrow, but it will eventually happen. Keith, thank you so much. Thank you I look forward to our next conversation. Where can everybody chase you down?
My website is thompsonatlarge.com, Thompson with a P, at large spelled out. I'm also on Twitter, Keith Thompson #1, Keith Thompson #1. I'm there, Twitter or X. And my book's available at the big booksellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, an ebook and print book, and also an audio book, a little late, but it'll be out in a couple of weeks.
Keith, enjoy the rest of your night, my man. Thank you so much.
So good to talk to you. Let's do it again.
Perfect show. Thank you so much. Keith Thompson, everybody. It's Thompson at Large. The links are below. I want to remind everybody what's going on. There's no show tomorrow. I won't be doing anything with Christina Gomez tomorrow. Mysteries with History. She'll be doing that solo. And I'm off. I've got to go and do some video stuff. So I'm going to get all of that done. And no, I don't know about Monday, but I'll keep you posted. We are definitely doing a show on Tuesday. Until then, all I've got is go Beckley Tappy. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go Beckley Tappy.